Sorry, but you can't have kids. And on top of that, you couldn't even do fertility treatments for a while because of that car accident, right? To be blunt, you're useless to me now. I found someone younger and she's pregnant, so I'm marrying Kate.
I stared in shock at Thomas, who said this so casually. The smirk on his face was hideous. Then, his mom, Lisa, calmly uttered something horrifying.
We've got an heir now, so we don't need you anymore.
Next, Kate threw her words at me.
Hurry up and get divorced.
As I stood there, taking in their cruel words, I slowly began to speak. I can't get divorced, you know, because... As I said those words, Thomas's face turned pale. You haven't forgotten, right? The promise you made when we got married. Thomas visibly started to tremble. I won't let things go his way. I'm dragging all of them down to hell. I clenched my fist tighter. My name is Emily, and I'm a 37-year-old office worker. I live with my husband, Thomas, who is 5 years younger than me. We live in a rented apartment close to the subway. We have a peaceful life with no major problems. That's what I'd like to say, but there's one issue. It's about having kids. We've been married for 5 years, but we still don't have any children. They say babies are a gift, and even if we didn't have one, I'd be okay with that. At least, that's what I thought, but Thomas and Lisa felt differently. His parents run a construction business and expect him to take over one day. Of course, Thomas has been working there since he graduated, and he's expected to become the CEO eventually. Naturally, his parents hope that Thomas's child will take over the business after him. Because of this, Lisa always gave me a sharp look. She was anxious about my age, being 5 years older than Thomas. The issue of having kids soon became a major problem in our household, and this led to something terrible happening. I'm heading out now.
All right, take care.
As I left our house, I started walking toward the hospital. I was undergoing fertility treatment. Since we couldn't conceive naturally, I decided to visit the hospital, considering my age. The first method we tried was timing therapy, but it didn't work out. Next, we moved on to artificial insemination, and now we're at the stage of in vitro fertilization. I frequently visited the hospital to get injections of ovulation-inducing drugs. Honestly, I never thought it would be this hard. But quitting treatment wasn't an option. Thomas would talk excitedly about playing soccer with our future child. And Lisa kept a close eye on my treatment progress, considering the future of the business. Feeling the pressure from both of them, I convinced myself I have to get pregnant no matter what. One day, it finally happened. I got pregnant.
Great job, Emily.
You did it, Emily. I'll start preparing for the baby right away.
They were over the moon. They called every relative and friend they could think of, turning it into a huge celebration. They even got into heated discussions about how to raise the child. Hey, we haven't even entered the safe period yet. Maybe you should calm down a bit. My words didn't reach either of them. They were discussing what to name the baby, as if I wasn't even there. I felt a growing sense of unease, like I was being left out all alone. A few weeks later, everything changed.
I'm sorry, but it looks like you've had a miscarriage this time.
What? The sudden pain in my abdomen had filled me with anxiety. I rushed to the hospital, only to be told the news bluntly by the doctor. I was so shocked that I couldn't move. The procedure was done quickly. And just like that, I lost my baby. As I left the hospital, a deep sense of loss began to well up inside me. At the same time, I thought about Thomas and Lisa. How could I possibly tell them? I hesitated, but I couldn't keep it a secret.
Welcome back. How did it go?
As soon as I walked in the door, Thomas greeted me cheerfully. Summoning all my courage, I spoke. The truth is, I had a miscarriage.
What?
Thomas looked at me with a puzzled expression. For a moment, I hoped he would comfort me. But his response was the exact opposite.
Why? I was so looking forward to this.
I couldn't believe my ears at his cruel words. Without even glancing at me, he quickly grabbed his phone and started dialing.
Hey, Mom. Emily had a miscarriage. Yeah, seriously, I can't believe it either.
I was stunned into silence, and a short time later, Lisa came over to our house.
Emily, is it true you had a miscarriage? Did you do something harmful to your body? Tell me the truth.
I didn't do anything like that. The doctor said miscarriages can happen even without a specific cause. I spoke nervously, shaken by Lisa's harsh questioning. But she just snorted in disgust.
Well, when I was pregnant with Thomas, I thought about the baby from morning till night and was extremely careful. That's why I had a successful delivery. The fact that you had a miscarriage means you weren't thinking about the baby enough. That must be it.
That's not true. Her cruel words left me speechless. I had been thinking about the baby every day. I never did anything reckless or unhealthy, of course. And yet, I still had a miscarriage. It wasn't something I could control. No matter how much I tried to explain, Thomas and Lisa wouldn't accept it. From then on, life became a living hell. It was clear that they had grown cold towards me.
Who knows when you'll get pregnant again?
Thomas started making these passive-aggressive remarks more and more, and Lisa would come over often just to throw jabs at me.
Did you hear? Thomas's cousin already has 3 kids, and here we are, with not even one. I guess having a younger wife would have been better.
At first, I tried to argue back, but eventually, I realized it was pointless. Nothing I said mattered anymore. They had completely made me out to be the bad guy. I lived each day with a heavy heart. I'm going to the hospital.
You better make it work this time. Seriously, I can't wait any longer to give Mom a grandkid, so don't mess this up again.
Thomas let out a loud, exaggerated sigh. Months passed, but nothing changed. Since then, the snide comments from Thomas and Lisa kept piercing my heart. Being blamed repeatedly, I had become entirely consumed by negative thoughts. Maybe it was my fault that I had a miscarriage. As I walked the usual route to the hospital, lost in those thoughts, it happened. A massive crash echoed around me. What? The moment I looked up, a powerful force hit my entire body. I lost consciousness immediately after. When I woke up next, I was in a place I didn't recognize.
Oh, you're awake.
Where am I? My whole body ached, and I couldn't move. While I was still in a daze, a person in a white coat approached and explained. Apparently, on my way to the hospital, I had been hit by a car whose driver wasn't paying attention. It was a major accident, and several other pedestrians were also involved. Among them, I had suffered the worst injuries. I was shocked to learn from the doctor that I had been in a coma for 3 days. Fortunately or unfortunately, my memory of the incident was fuzzy after the impacts. My parents, who had been visiting, kept telling me with tear-filled eyes how worried they had been, so I must have been in pretty bad shape. After numerous tests, I was relieved to find out that none of my injuries were life-threatening. However, the doctor told me that without rehabilitation, I wouldn't regain full use of my body. As it turned out, the rehab took longer than expected, and I ended up staying in the hospital for 6 months. At first, I was in shock from the accident, but as time passed, I gradually calmed down. That's when I started to wonder about Thomas. He hadn't visited me even once. Luckily, my mom had been coming to take care of me, but it was strange that my husband hadn't shown up. Even when I informed him about the accident, his reaction was so nonchalant, and that was it.
That's rough. Well, good luck with your rehab.
Even though our relationship had been strained since the miscarriage, not visiting me after such a serious accident, what was I to Thomas? I was grappling with this emptiness when it happened.
Excuse me, but are you one of the people who got injured in that accident in the next town over?
Oh, yes. I was in the rehab room when a man approached me. He seemed a bit older than me, and he was using a cane.
I was involved in that accident too. It's such bad luck, isn't it? Just walking down the street, and then this happens. How's your recovery going?
The man looked at me with genuine concern. Now that I think about it, the doctor had mentioned that several people were caught up in the accident. It seemed like this man was one of them. I let my guard down and replied with a smile. Yes, I'm doing okay, thanks. They say if I keep working hard in rehab, I'll regain more movement, so I'm really pushing myself.
Same here. Let's work hard each other.
We talked a little more after that. His name was James. He was 42 years old, 5 years older than me, and was staying in the room across from mine. James had lost his wife a few years ago, and now he lived alone.
Since there's no one to take care of me, I have to manage everything on my own. Plus, I've been off work for a while, so I really need to get back soon.
James spoke with a smile, revealing just how kind-hearted he was. We often ran into each other in the rehab room, and he always showed concern for my well-being. He encouraged me whenever I felt down. It wouldn't be an exaggeration to say that James was the reason I managed to stay positive. Soon, James no longer needed his cane. Since his injuries were less severe than mine, he recovered faster. He would likely be discharged soon. I couldn't help but feel a bit lonely at the thought. One day,
Thomas hasn't been around much, has he?
my mom, who was visiting me in the hospital, commented casually, "He's just busy with work." I replied without meeting her eyes. In truth, I had reached out to Thomas several times through texts and calls, but he either ignored them or sent back brief, curt replies. There was never any mention of visiting me at the hospital. Sure, we had been in a Cold War since the miscarriage, but for him not to show up even once after such a serious accident, it was too strange. His wife was in a coma for 3 days after an accident, and yet he didn't visit. How heartless could he be? Had he completely detached himself emotionally? Naturally, our fertility treatments had also come to a halt. I felt a sense of urgency, but at the same time, I began to question things. Did I really want to have a child? I used to think that if we had a baby, it would make Thomas and Lisa happy. But now, it felt like my own desires were being left behind. Should I even consider restarting the treatment? As I wrestled with these doubts, time continued to pass. Then, a few weeks later, James was set to be discharged before me and came to my room to say goodbye. Congratulations on your discharge.
Thank you. You'll be out soon too, Emily. Your recovery is going really well.
James looked a bit reluctant to leave. A silence settled between us for a moment. James seemed like he had something to say. Finally, after gathering his thoughts, he spoke up.
Well, I've been debating whether or not I should say this, but I think it's something you should know.
What is it? I asked, meeting his gaze. James looked serious. Then, he revealed something that completely shocked me. A few weeks later, my recovery was progressing well. I was cleared for discharge, with only a weekly checkup required moving forward. Fortunately, there were hardly any lasting effects from the accident. While I felt relieved, my mind was consumed by what James had told me.
Are you okay?
Yeah. My mom insisted on accompanying me back to my apartment, clearly worried. It wasn't just about my physical condition. It was because of what James had told me. I had shared it with her, which only added to her concern. I felt bad for causing her more worry, but I couldn't keep it to myself any longer. My fate would drastically change after the conversation that was about to take place. My mom and I took a taxi and got off in front of the apartment. It had been 6 months since I last came home. When I opened the door of my house, I heard women's voices. A bad feeling crept over me as I opened the door to the living room. I'm home. There they were, Thomas, Lisa, and a young woman, chatting away.
Oh, you're back.
Thomas said, noticing me and smiling. Lisa and the young woman gave me a quick glance. I looked around the living room and saw that my belongings had been neatly packed and placed in a corner. What's this? I muttered, and Thomas responded casually.
Oh, that. I packed up your stuff. Sorry you just got back, but could you move out now?
What?
Sorry, but my girlfriend's pregnant.
Thomas said this as he gazed at the young woman sitting beside him. The woman greeted me with a triumphant smile.
Nice to meet you. I'm Kate.
She then lovingly patted her belly. I stood there in shock, as did my mom.
Sorry, but you can't have kids, and you couldn't even do fertility treatments for a while because of the accident, right? To be blunt, you're useless to me now. Kate's young and pregnant, so I'm marrying her.
I stared in disbelief at Thomas, who said all this so nonchalantly. The smirk on his face was unbearably repulsive. My mom was so stunned that she couldn't even form words. Then Lisa, as calmly as ever, said something terrifying.
We've got an heir now, so we don't need you anymore.
Kate also chimed in, spitting out her words.
Hurry up and get divorced.
Unable to bear the situation any longer, my mom finally spoke up.
What's wrong with you people?
I stopped her with my hand. I already knew that Thomas had a mistress, but I had planned to talk things over with him calmly after I was discharged. I never imagined he would actually bring her into our home. I was shocked to realize just how inhumane he had become. I slowly began to speak. I can't get divorced, because... I paused for a moment. Because of that promise, remember? Thomas frowned in confusion.
What?
Did you forget? The promise we made when we got married? As the memory finally dawned on him, Thomas's face turned pale.
You can't bring that up now. Besides, promises don't matter anymore. I've already got the divorce papers ready. I'll just file them myself.
Thomas waved the divorce papers in the air. Not only had he signed his part, but somehow my part was filled out as well. Someone must have forged my signature. But I wasn't going to back down. You can't just do that. I've already filed a notice to prevent the divorce from being processed.
What?
Thomas looked utterly dumbfounded. I know all about your little scheme. I'm fully aware that you've been sneaking around with another woman while I was in the hospital. That's why I filed the notice ahead of time to prevent the divorce from going through. Didn't you know that? I had learned all of this from a certain lawyer. That lawyer was none other than James. The day James was discharged, he told me everything. While I was in rehab and out of my room, Thomas and Lisa had visited my hospital room. By chance, James had also come to see me at that time. James was about to leave when he overheard a suspicious conversation between Thomas and Lisa.
Is Emily not here?
Looks like it. Well, there's no point in staying. Let's go.
They were looking around nervously and then started whispering.
I was planning to bring up the divorce, though.
It's perfect timing now that Thomas has found a young woman who suits him better than that old, infertile Emily.
Lisa said with a laugh, and Thomas nodded in agreement.
Exactly. Kate's pregnant, so Emily's out of the picture. We need to get her out of here as soon as possible.
Let's kick her out as soon as she's discharged. We should start packing up her stuff from your house.
Good idea. That way, she'll have to leave right away. We're so thoughtful.
James was shocked when he heard this horrifying conversation. He agonized over whether or not to tell me, but he ultimately decided it was better for me to know beforehand than to come home to such a terrible surprise.
I'm so sorry you had to hear this. I know it's not something you wanted to hear.
James apologized to me over and over, but I reassured him, "Don't worry about it." Even though I was shocked, I felt a strange sense of clarity. Now it made sense why Thomas never visited me. In their minds, they had already written me off. If that's how they felt, then I had no reason to care anymore. The time I had spent agonizing over fertility treatments and their nasty comments felt like a distant memory, and I felt surprisingly calm. But James still looked troubled. He then pulled out a business card from his pocket.
This is my contact information. If you need anything, please feel free to reach out.
The card had the name and number of a law office. It read, James Smith, attorney at law. Yes, James was a lawyer. After that, I discussed everything with my mom. My mom, who knew nothing, stood there in disbelief, completely stunned.
Thomas did that.
It's a shock, isn't it? But part of me always suspected there might be someone else. It's strange that he never visited me, especially after such a serious accident. And considering his recent behavior, I want to know the truth. Mom, I'm sorry, but could you help me? I couldn't afford to be afraid anymore. I needed to take action and gather evidence. My mom and I made a plan. While I was still in the hospital, she went to check on the apartment where Thomas was living. That's when she spotted a young woman coming and going from the apartment with Thomas. The woman was young, flashy, and seemed very close to Thomas. She was holding a childbirth class pamphlet in her hand. When I saw the photos my mom had taken, it was clear to anyone that they looked like a couple. It turned out that James was telling the truth. Thomas really planned to marry this woman and leave me behind. Instead of getting angry, I felt a strange calmness wash over me. Now that I knew the truth, there was no need to hold back. I decided it was time to make Thomas and the others face the consequences. I pulled out the photos I had as evidence and showed them right in front of the three of them. The color drained from their faces. So, as you can see, you can't just go ahead with the divorce. Got it? Thomas, perhaps misinterpreting my words to suit his own narrative, spoke confidently.
I see. So deep down, you don't actually want a divorce, huh? Too bad. But my feelings for you are long gone. Just accept it and move on.
So that's what he comes up with. Such ridiculous arrogance. I had to fight hard to hold back my laughter. What an idiot. I couldn't care less about you anymore. What I'm concerned about is whether that promise is going to be kept, specifically whether you're going to pay me back the money you owe. Thomas's face turned pale.
Hey, don't bring that up here.
What do you mean, that?
Lisa immediately started questioning Thomas. Kate, his mistress, looked completely bewildered, as if she had no idea what was going on. Before we got married, Thomas and I had made a certain agreement. This guy was addicted to gambling when we were dating. He had a ton of debt, but he promised me he'd work hard to pay it off, so I covered his debts and married him. Thomas begged me, "Please don't tell my parents. It's too embarrassing." So I kept quiet until now. We agreed that he'd pay me back little by little every month. But he hasn't finished paying me back yet. That's why I'm not agreeing to a divorce until I get all my money back. As I laid it all out, Thomas's face turned from pale to utterly hopeless. Of course, I had a signed IOU to back up my claims. There was no way he could talk his way out of this. Lisa, seeing the look on Thomas's face, lost her composure.
Gambling? You haven't learned your lesson yet? And now you've racked up more debt.
I had heard before that Thomas had been hooked on gambling since his college days. Back then, it was Lisa who had covered his debts. Thomas had sworn to his parents that he'd never gamble again. That's why he couldn't let them find out, so he borrowed money from me instead.
What? More debt? Thomas, you told me you had plenty of money. You bragged about it all the time.
Kate started to get hysterical as well. At that point, all hell broke loose. The three of them were nearly losing their minds, shouting and blaming each other at the top of their lungs. Seeing that things had spiraled out of control, I told them, "Thanks for packing up my stuff. It saved me a lot of trouble. I'm leaving this house and going back to my parents'. If you want the divorce to go through quickly, you better pay up in full." With that, my mom and I began moving my things to the front door. We called a taxi and left the scene. When we got back to my parents' house, my dad welcomed us. But when he heard what had happened, he was furious.
I never thought Thomas could be such a scumbag. He's the worst kind of person.
It was only natural that anyone hearing this story would get angry. We had to stop my dad from storming over to Thomas's place, yelling that he would settle things directly. A week later, I got a message on my phone. It was from Thomas. He said he wanted to talk about the debt, so we arranged a meeting with him, Lisa, and Kate. The designated meeting place was a nearby cafe. I arrived early and waited, and soon the three of them walked in. They all looked remarkably defiant. When Thomas saw the person sitting next to me, he muttered suspiciously,
Who's this guy?
Before I could answer, James, sitting beside me, spoke up.
Nice to meet you. I'm James Smith, an attorney.
James handed them his business card, and I could see their expressions visibly shrink. I figured we'd need someone impartial for this discussion, so I brought him along. It's better to have a third party involved, don't you think? I said this firmly, and the three of them looked uncomfortable. They clearly didn't want anyone else to see them in such an embarrassing situation. Ignoring their discomfort, I continued. So, are you going to pay me the money you owe? Lisa spoke up, her face twisted in frustration.
Well, there's no other choice. Thomas doesn't have the money, so I'll pay for it.
When I looked at Thomas, he had shrunk down, looking utterly defeated. It wasn't surprising that he had no money. He had never been the type to save. Even after we got married, he only managed to pay me back a little bit each month, around $100 at most. And once we started the fertility treatments, those payments became even less frequent. Lisa said she would transfer the full amount into my account. I then placed the completed divorce papers on the table. I've already signed my part. Now, you just need to sign yours. Once I confirm the money is in my account, I'll file these. Thomas looked at me with a nervous expression.
So, you'll divorce me after that?
Yes. I answered him flatly.
Then that means all of Thomas's debts are cleared. And there's nothing stopping us from getting married now.
Kate said with a smile on her face. Of course, this wasn't the end of it. What I said next would throw them into complete despair. I must say, Thomas, you're quite something. Planning to raise a child that's not even yours.
What do you mean by that?
Thomas looked confused, while Kate's face began to pale.
What are you talking about?
Kate was clearly panicking. Seeing this, I couldn't help but smile smugly. I had already looked into Kate's identity. Kate worked at a nightclub. I had tracked down her social media accounts. According to what I found, it seems that Thomas met Kate when he visited her workplace. In her posts, she naively wrote things like, "We're getting married soon." But that wasn't the important part. I had also found her secret account. On it, she wrote, "The baby I'm carrying isn't actually my fiance's. It's from another customer." It seemed that the customer didn't have money. And since she didn't want to deal with someone poor, she decided to pass off the baby as belonging to a wealthy client and marry him instead. That wealthy client was Thomas. Thomas often bragged to others that his family ran a construction business and that he had money. It's no wonder Kate was under that impression. Basically, Kate had been planning to deceive Thomas, making him believe that the baby was his and marrying him for his money. When Thomas realized the truth, he was visibly shaken.
Kate, is this true?
Well, it's...
Kate fell silent. Then Lisa jumped into the fray.
Kate, what do you mean by this? You said you were going to have Thomas's child. That's why I agreed to this marriage.
Kate mumbled a weak excuse, but it was obvious she was lying. The three of them quickly descended into a state of paranoia, pointing fingers at each other. It was pathetic. I was completely disgusted. Lisa, still red with anger, shouted at the top of her lungs.
I allowed Thomas to marry a younger woman like Kate for the sake of the company's future, and I even agreed to pay off his debt. If the baby isn't Thomas's, then this is outright fraud. Kate, you'd better explain yourself.
Kate looked down and trembled. Amidst the chaos, I quietly said, "Well, Kate, I do think what you did was awful, but Lisa, you're in no position to criticize anyone, are you?"
What are you talking about?
Lisa, caught off guard, snapped back at me. I calmly pulled out a photo from my bag. The moment she saw it, Lisa's face froze. The photo showed Lisa arm in arm with an older man who wasn't her husband. They were just about to enter a hotel together, looking quite cozy.
What is this? Mom, what's going on?
Now it was Thomas's turn to interrogate his mom.
This is, well,
As it turns out, Lisa was also having an affair. The man was someone she had met through her ballroom dancing hobby, and they had been seeing each other for years. This came to light while I was investigating Thomas's behavior, and the information just fell into my lap. In short, they all had skeletons in their closets. The three of them began hurling ugly accusations at each other.
How could you, Mom? Cheating on Dad with another man.
don't you dare judge me. This is all because of your gambling debts in the first place.
Kate jumped in to defend herself.
You're both terrible. Thomas, you hid your debt from me, and Lisa, you have no right to lecture me.
Oh, please, Kate. Trying to pass off another man's child as mine? That's beyond disgraceful.
It was complete chaos. I tried to get them to calm down, but my words fell on deaf ears. Just then, James, who had been silent until now, placed two documents on the table. For a moment, everyone stopped.
Let's save the name calling for later. I'm here today for one reason, to present you with a formal claim for damages. Infidelity during a marriage is considered a serious breach of trust. These documents are addressed to both Thomas and Kate. Please make sure the payment is made by the deadline.
The three of them stared at the documents, where the compensation amounts were clearly listed.
What is this?
Thomas's face crumbled in despair. Of course, this is separate from the debt you owe me. Naturally, I'm also claiming compensation for the emotional distress you've caused. With a strained voice, Lisa spoke to me as I smiled.
You greedy witch.
Excuse me? I'm just exercising my rightful claims. James backed me up.
If you fail to pay, we will take this matter to court. Based on legal precedents, it's highly likely that you will lose.
Lisa hung her head. Thomas and Kate were scowling in frustration. Once I confirm the money has been paid, I'll agree to the divorce. Looking forward to your cooperation. With that, I left the cafe with James by my side.
That must have been tough, dealing with people like that.
James said, offering me some comforting words. Yeah, it really was. I replied with a bittersweet smile. The following week, I checked my account and found that the money had been deposited. The remaining amount of the debt I had covered for Thomas, the alimony from Thomas, and the alimony from Kate. All the deposits were made under Lisa's name. She probably had no choice but to pay up since those two didn't have any money. What a hassle for her. After that, I submitted the divorce papers. And just like that, I was officially single again. I'll never have to see Thomas or Lisa again. I no longer have to endure those painful fertility treatments either. Gradually, I began to regain my strength. Later, I heard through acquaintances that Thomas and Kate had broken up. Thomas reportedly said, "I'm not raising another man's kid." And Kate retorted, "I'm not marrying someone with debt," before walking out. As for Lisa, After her affair was exposed, her husband served her with divorce papers too. She and Thomas were thrown out of the house and are now apparently living in miserable conditions. They got exactly what they deserved. I couldn't feel an ounce of sympathy for them. As for me, I returned to my old life. The only difference was that, after staying with my parents for a while, I moved into a new apartment since my job was too far from their house. And one more thing. Since then, I've been going out to eat with James from time to time. After losing his wife, James had stopped going out much outside of work. It seemed it had been a long time since he had shared a meal with anyone.
These days, my coworkers often tell me I've become more cheerful.
Same here. It's like a weight has been lifted off my shoulders. I think it's thanks to you, James, I said with a smile. James waved his hand modestly.
Oh, I didn't do much, but if anything else comes up, please don't hesitate to reach out. I'd like to be there for you, Emily. This time, not just for work.
James said this while looking a bit shy. Wait, does that mean? My heart started racing as I looked at James. Seeing his face, a warm feeling spread through my chest. It had been a long time since I felt this way. It was a strange mix of happiness and a bit of nervous excitement. I couldn't help but smile, and James and I shared a laugh together.